Hello dear students and welcome to Organic Agriculture class. In this presentation we will be talking about the introduction to organic agriculture. We'll learn a little bit about what is the principles and approaches of organic agriculture, and we'll discuss soil health and stability. So first let's define what is actually organic agriculture. First, let's discuss the USDA, or United States Department of Agriculture's definition of organic agriculture. Let's read. Organic agriculture is defined as food that has been grown without the aid of synthetic pesticides or chemical fertilizers and was produced without the use of genetically modified organisms or chemical food additives. However, if we look at other definitions, we can see that other people define organic agriculture in a more broad and holistic approach. Let's look at the IFORM, or International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements, based in Europe's definition. So they define organic agriculture as the production system that sustains the health, soils, ecosystems, and people. It relies on ecological processes, biodiversity, and cycles adapted to local conditions, rather than the use of inputs with adverse effects. Organic agriculture combines tradition, innovation, and science to benefit the shared environment and promote fair relationships and a good quality of life for all involved. So rather than a very narrow definition that only puts organic agriculture in terms of what it can or cannot use, the IFORM definition is more broad, holistic approach that defines organic agriculture as a sustainable approach that conserves soils, ecosystems, and people. So, since organic farming positions itself as opposed to conventional farming, in order to better understand organic, we have to understand the principles that define conventional farming as the modern and most consistent approach that people use worldwide. So here are some principles of conventional farming. First, it uses rapid technological innovations. Usually it requires large capital investments in order to apply production. It no longer uses family farms or small-scale farms, but rather large-scale farms, usually combining a lot of small farmers together. It, in most cases, applies monoculture, which uses single crops that continuously grows over successive seasons. Most importantly, it uses high-yield hybrid crops. It uses extensive use of pesticides, fertilizers, and external energy inputs. It has high labor efficiency because it uses a lot of heavy machinery that can replace a lot of small different labor persons in the field, and it depends on agribusiness. How did conventional farming become the way it is today? So the first revolution was at the end of the 19th century and was defined as the first application of artificial fertilizers. At the beginning of the 20th century, a person called Fritz Haber discovered a way to produce ammonia from atmospheric nitrogen. As you know, plants need a lot of nitrogen in order to accumulate biomass and eventually produce a lot of yield. But it cannot use atmospheric nitrogen. It can only use inorganic nitrogen. And what Fritz Haber discovered was a way to produce it in large scale from atmospheric nitrogen using a lot of stress and a lot of heat. At that time, people thought that without the use of large-scale ammonia production, it would not be possible to feed the world population. And this was the first revolution that allowed modern or conventional farming to become the way it is today. The second revolution that allowed conventional farming to become the way it is today is the use of pesticides. At the beginning of the 1940s, these new compounds allowed for farmers to get rid of all pests that were in the field. However, following the next few decades, people have begun to understand that overuse of pesticides has a major price to pay in terms of affecting the health of humans, animals, and also pollinators, as well as breaking the fine balance of ecological systems around farmlands. One of the major concerns that conventional farming brings with it is the decline in soil productivity. Basically, the major concern is called soil erosion. This is a natural process that is caused by wind and water, but it is accelerated with conventional extensive agriculture. Usually what happens is, with extensive tillage and extensive working of the land year after year, the topsoil is being exposed, and then due to wind and water, the topsoil gets run off and carried away as dust. This causes, in the long run, a decreased ability of the soil to hold water and organic matter to sustain the crops that we grow on it, as well as a biological activity that is important to sustain crops. Eventually, if we use the land too much for too many years, we cannot use it anymore because the land will be too salinized and without the ability to hold water and organic matter. One of the best known examples for soil erosion is called the Dust Bowl phenomenon. This phenomenon happened during the 1930s in the United States. As you can see in the map, the area that is colored in orange and yellow covers a huge part of the land in the Midwest of the United States. During the 1930s, there was a period of 10 years where there was no rain, almost. Coupled with the fact that farmers at this area used extensive tillage and the lack of water, caused the top part of the soil to be eroded by winds. Since the top part of the soil was loose, due to a lot of years of extensive tillage, this land actually became dust. And this dust carried with the winds all over this area that you can see in the map, causing a huge disaster, huge economical disaster that caused people to not be able to work their lands and lose their jobs. And this caused them to move either east or west at that time. Another major issue or major concern with conventional agriculture is the pollution of water sources. For example, we can see the drain basin of the Mississippi River in the United States. As you can see on the map, this whole huge area from the East Coast to the Rocky Mountains in the United States is drained by the Mississippi River and its many precursors. So, as you know, what happens is if you use a lot of pesticides and fertilizers, naturally it will not stay in the soil for so long. It will be run off with rain and irrigation into the water sources, eventually going into the sea. So what scientists have discovered that in the delta of the Mississippi, in the area that is close to the sea, a lot of the fertilizers and pesticides that are rich in nitrogen and phosphorus has caused huge algal blooms. The problem with algal blooms is that, first of all, they block the sunlight for organisms that are in the depth of the water, as well as reducing the amount of dissolved oxygen. The result is death of many marine animals, such as fish and crustaceans. This is eventually became as the dead zone in the Mexico Gulf. Another concern with industrial farming has to do with resistance of insects that are considered pests and other pathogens to the use of pesticides. So currently over 400 insect and mite pest species and over 70 fungal pathogens have developed resistance that is the result of the use of the same pesticide year after year. The other side of this coin is that since the pesticides are harmful for insects, they can also harm beneficial insect populations such as pollinators and natural enemies of our pests in the field. Another major issue with conventional farming is the lack of diversity. Today we know that approximately 70% of the world's food comes from only 12 crop species and 5 animal species. So what is the problem with that? Does anyone have an idea?
I know what the problem. In the lack of diversity, we have the lack of solution, okay? If I have no genetic variety, I have no solution how to overcome drought, new pests that are arriving, or climate change that we for sure can see. So where do we going to find all of these genes if we have only 12 crops?
As we've mentioned before, another hallmark of conventional farming is that basically it's not a family-run business anymore. It's our conglomerates or agribusinesses. These are huge businesses, industrial complexes that brings together a lot of farmers together. And naturally, this puts the farmer in a worse stage than it used to be. It has farmers actually have way less little control over the produce prices and receive smaller portions of the consumer money. Another problem is that actually, if you can see in an example below, what happens is because these are huge businesses, they control a lot of the market. But in terms of number of businesses, the number of businesses is very small. So in United States, for example, the largest 4% of the farms controls and produces over 66% of all food produced. So let's imagine a scenario in which one or two of these businesses fall. That means that we have a major food security issue because we can lose a lot of food if one or two of these companies lose their business. So now we ask the question, what kind of agriculture is better, organic or conventional? So a lot of people have tried to answer this question, and in an example that you will see right now, the Swedish Food Administration had pulled together a lot of different studies and researches that was done over the years trying to decide what kind of farming approach is better. So what they did here is they took a lot of different branches of farming, such as dairy, milk, veggies and grains, and they tried to answer the question which one is better in terms of different categories such as climate, over-fertilization, soil acidification, ecotoxicity, meaning the toxic compounds that are released to the environment, and the land use. So if you look at the different boxes, you will see that they have different colors. The red color means that conventional farming is better, blue means that organic is better, and yellow means that they are equally efficient in the terms of the categories that are used in this study. So if we look, for example, at ecotoxicity, meaning the amount of toxic compounds that are released into the environment, we can clearly see that organic agriculture is better. However, if we look at land use, we can see that conventional farming is better because, as you remember, the yield is that much higher. And so actually from 1 dunam or 1 hectare of land we can produce much more, saving the other land that can be used for ecosystems parks, forests, and so on. And so it's not a really question of black and white. It's not really clear which one is better, but that more depends on the different way that you look at it, the different branch of farming that you inspect, and the different category in which you compare the two.
Bro, this asparagus is like totally organic, coming from the earth, like the ground, man. Mother Nature, bro. It like flows through my soul. On this video, we will be covering organic food, what does organic mean, and answering the question of is organic food healthier? At the end, we're going to discuss what foods are the most important to eat organic. Let's get started by answering the question of what does organic mean? Organic food is food produced with the standards of organic farming. Standards vary worldwide, but they generally mean food produced without the use of synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. Animal products only qualify as organic if they do not take antibiotics or hormones during their development. Now I should clarify, pesticides can be used by organic farmers on crops, just as long as they are derived from natural sources and are not synthetically created, which seems reasonable, because mass-producing crops without any pesticides would be a nightmare with wasted food in epic proportions. So now that we know what organic food means, we can move on to discussing is organic food healthier or not. First, let's get the obvious out of the way. As my homeboys over at ASAP Science so aptly put, just because a bag of chips has organic on the label does not make them healthy. Cookies, chips, and ice cream are not suddenly good for you because they are organic. But when people ask is organic food healthier, they are usually asking for a comparison of foods like veggies, fruits, and certain animal products, which leads us to an important point. The scientific data we have is actually very split on this issue. The reason? Money, money, money. Money! There is a lot of money to be had in this industry. Monsanto, the famous poster child for evil pesticide producers, makes over $4.5 billion in yearly sales and spends an average of $5 million a year on public lobbying. And it's not just them. People have been lobbying for and against organic food for a while now. Conflicts of interest seem to be the rule and not the exception. When most people say that organic is not healthier for you, they usually cite a Stanford review done in 2012 that came to the conclusion that organic foods are not more nutritious than conventional foods. Although the study did concede that organic does limit the exposure of pesticides and antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Unfortunately, the people doing this study received millions of dollars from Cargill, which has been linked to Monsanto, the pesticide company we just talked about. So that's a little weird. A new study published by the British Journal of Nutrition is the latest addition to the debate. It's the largest meta-analysis that has been published on this topic, covering 343 individual studies looking into organic food. One of the major conclusions found organic foods could boost a person's antioxidant intake by up to 40%. However, this study was funded by an organic farming charity. See what I mean about conflicts of interest? One thing in favor of eating organic that these studies cannot refute is reducing the amount of pesticides being ingested. On average, pesticides like cadmium had levels 400% lower, respectively, in organic produce than in conventional varieties. Since cadmium is a highly toxic metal that has been linked to an increased risk of everything from Alzheimer's disease, cardiovascular disease, and hormone disruption, it's probably a good idea to minimize the amount of cadmium in your diet. Other studies have also linked pesticide exposure in children to ADHD and other developmental problems like low IQ. But it's not just about us. Is organic food healthier for our planet? Unfortunately, there's no real clear-cut answer to this question. Organic farming has more fertile soil, uses less energy, and is more profitable for farmers. However, non-organic crops have higher yields and help to reduce erosion. It's a bit of a toss-up. So, health nerd, are organic foods healthier for you? I'd have to say yes. In some studies, they have slightly more nutrients and do minimize our exposure to synthetic pesticides, antibiotics, and hormones added to what we eat. All things equal, organic would be healthier for you. So should everyone eat organic? It depends. Cost is an issue for many people, so if you're going to spend those hard-earned dollar bills buying organic, keep these three things in mind. Number one, it seems animal products are more important to buy organic than veggies. Because prolonged exposure to both antibiotics and hormones is clearly clearly harmful to our health, focus on organic animal products first. I know this can be expensive, so number 2, frozen organic foods are always a little cheaper. Organic fruits, veggies, and meats can usually be found in the freezer section these days. Number 3, use the Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen list for fruits and veggies. Some fruits and veggies require more pesticides to grow than others. The Clean 15 are non-organic foods that have minimal pesticide exposure. Avocados, sweet corn, pineapples, cabbage, frozen sweet peas, onions, asparagus, mangoes, papayas, kiwi, eggplant, honeydew, grapefruit, cantaloupe, and cauliflower. The Dirty Dozen, on the other hand, are foods that have a lot of pesticide load if consumed non-organic. These foods are strawberries, apples, nectarines, peaches, celery, grapes, cherries, spinach, tomatoes, sweet bell peppers, cherry tomatoes, and cucumbers. My final tip is actually the most important because there's something you can do that seems to be just as good for you as eating organic, and that's eating foods in season. Foods in season have been proven to have more nutrients than out of season. For example, the vitamin C content in broccoli has been shown to be
So now that we know what is organic agriculture, and even if you don't aim to be an organic farmer yourself, let's ask the question, why is organic farming relevant to us? So basically there are two main reasons. The first one is economic. This is because organic farmer can demand higher prices on the produce as opposed to conventional produces. So in a lot of cases you can see that organic produce can be sold as 2 or 3 times higher than its conventional counterpart. You can also use resources within your environment to produce, let's say, compost or green manures that you will see just ahead. Of course, the other reason could be environmental reasons. It's better for our health and for the health of the ecosystems around us. So in this part, we'll discuss a little bit about the advantages of organic agriculture and the way that it deals with the challenges that arise with any agricultural system. So when we talk about soil health, which is the part that we are discussing now, we can divide it into two major aspects. The first one is soil stability, which is the conservation of soil and water, and the second part has to do with the ability of the soil to provide the nutrients and the growth compounds for the plants. This part we will discuss in the next class.